Welcome to Bible U. I'm Pat. Today we're going to ask the question, are you really listening? Whether as a parent or a child, we've probably all heard or said something to the effect of, "Did you hear what I said?" Or maybe, "Were you listening to me?" Most often these words were uttered by someone in authority because their charge had not done what they were asked to do. For example, when my father would say, "Patrick, did you hear what I said?" He wasn't actually asking if my ears picked up the sound waves, but instead was reminding me that my listening should result in action. What's interesting is that in our modern Western culture, we often tend to focus on mental activity. Most of the quizzes and tests that we take in school are only asking us to regurgitate some information that we heard either by lecture or by reading. However, the culture our Bible was written in was very action-oriented, and this is actually reflected in the language of that time. As some of you know, the Older Testament was written in Hebrew, and one of the most well-known Hebrew words is Shema. I say it is one of the most well-known because for way over 2,000 years, devout Jews have quoted what they call the Shema every morning and every night. It comes from the first word of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, which is, can you guess? Shema. In the past, I unpacked why this might be the most important verse in the Bible, but for today, let's dig into the specifics of this Hebrew word Shema. The word Shema has the primary meaning of hear or listen. But interestingly, this word also is interpreted as understanding, obeying, or taking heed. In other words, the Hebrew word we translate hear means far more than just the mental activity of hearing with our ears. It means to hear and apply, to hear and do, to hear and obey. Almost every place we see the word obey in the English Bible, it has been translated from the word Shema. Why is that significant? Because to God, we actually haven't heard if we don't obey. Just because you can quote a verse or give mental assent to something God says doesn't mean you Shema'd it. Okay, I just made up that word, Shema'd, but it's fitting, isn't it? Here's something interesting to try. Something that will make parts of the Bible come alive. When you see the word hear, H-E-A-R, in the English Bible, try reading obey in place of it and note how the meaning is enriched. For example, if it said, "and they heard the voice of God," read it as, "and they obeyed the voice of God." Because to God, you really haven't heard if you haven't obeyed. Knowing the deeper meaning of Shema, that is really two sides of the same coin, meaning that it is both hearing and obeying, helps us understand why Jesus, speaking to a Hebrew culture, said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." He's telling us to not just listen, but to put his words into action. No wonder James wrote these words in James chapter 1, verse 22. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. James is saying you haven't really, okay, here's my made up word again. You haven't really shema'd the words of God if you haven't shema'd the words of God. You haven't really heard the words of God if you aren't obeying the words of God. You see, our Western thinking stresses the application of intellect when it comes to listening. But the culture our Bible was written in emphasizes that we have not truly taken what we have heard into our hearts until it transforms our lives as well. The next time you hear yourself or another adult ask the hypothetical question, "Do you hear what I said?" Remind yourself that God asked you and I the same question with a deeper meaning. When God, our loving Father, says, "My child, did you hear what I said?" He's actually asking us, did you listen and did you obey? So here's our challenge. Let's make sure we shema what God tells us.